Hello. So, in today's video I thought I would talk about some of the Stephen King novels I have and why specifically I have these. So a little while ago I set myself a challenge, and that was to read every Stephen King novel chronologically. There's no particular reason for setting this other than I realised I hadn't read very many Stephen King novels, and I didn't really know where to start. So I thought I'd start at the beginning, and then I thought, well, why don't I just keep going through them one by one chronologically until I got bored. And I haven't got bored yet. And I think I'm a good 10 novels deep. So the first novel that I read, it's not actually in this pile, it's on my Kindle, and that was Carrie. That revolves around a protagonist called Carrie White. She was an unpopular misfit at school who was bullied. She came from an abusive religious household. But she discovers she has these telekinetic powers, and she uses those powers to exact revenge on the people that have abused her. Then it gets out of control and ends rather disastrously. So that was King's first novel, and it really made him famous overnight. If you've read his book on writing, which I have read, I hadn't read his novels very much, but I had read his non-fiction. And on writing, which is both a book explaining the craft of writing, but also an autobiography of sorts. He explains that one day he was working as a teacher at school. The next he got a phone call saying, from a publisher saying, we would like to accept your manuscript and here's a rather sizable advance. And the rest was history. So he had a very sudden rise to success. And rightly so. So that was Carrie. Then I read Salem's Lot, which I also don't have as a hard copy. I have that on my Kindle. And Salem's Lot was about a man called Ben Mears, I think, who returns to his hometown to discover that everyone there is a vampire. It's another great early novel of King's. Probably one you've read when you were younger, and a lot of these earlier books are really great to read when you're much younger, I would imagine. But they still hold up in adulthood. Still very good novels in their own right. Then, now that I felt I was serious about King, I decided to buy the more expensive physical copies, and that, chronologically, meant I needed to buy The Shining. And I was somewhat surprised that The Shining was such an early novel of King's. I don't know why I thought it was later. I think maybe because I'd seen the film, obviously, by Stanley Kubrick, and the film felt to me then, as it does now, very modern. And so I assumed this was based on a book by a very well established writer, someone who'd been writing for years and years, not someone early in their career, which Stephen King still was at this time. So that was slightly surprising. The Shining, I'm sure you know, centres on the life of Jack Torrance, who's a struggling writer and recovering alcoholic. He accepts a position at a remote hotel called the Overlook Hotel, where he'll be a janitor over the winter months. But he goes a little stir crazy, to put it mildly. And his son Danny has something called the Shining, which gives him special powers, allowing him to see into the horrific past of the hotel. Stephen King, incidentally, didn't like the Stanley Kubrick adaptation. He said that it was there was no warmth to it, and I think that's a fair assessment of Kubrick's film. There isn't any warmth in it at all, but I do think that was intentional. But they seem to me to be two very different men, Stephen King and Stanley Kubrick, because I think what's crucial to understanding Stephen King's approach to writing and his approach to horror, and why I think his horror became so popular, is that behind all the misery and the destruction and the death and the supernatural, there is a warmth. There is good in there as well. And in my opinion, I think that he got that largely from Ray Bradbury, who he claims he's a big fan of Ray Bradbury. Stephen King said, if there was no Ray Bradbury, there would be no Stephen King. And I can absolutely see the influence there. And the influence isn't in necessarily the similarities in genre, because Ray Bradbury wrote Fahrenheit 451. He also wrote The Martian Chronicles. But having said that, the similarities start to disappear when you consider that Bradbury also wrote some, genreless fiction. Think about Dandelion Wine or Farewell Summer. Those aren't horror, fantasy, or anything really. But the similarities always remain in this sensation of warmth and kindness that permeates the novels of both writers. And I know that might sound strange to say that Stephen King has a lot of warmth in his novels, but next time you read one, keep that top of mind and you'll see it. You'll see it there. There's always one character, who is exceptionally warm or forgiving or compassionate in some way. I think that is sort of the secret formula with King, and part of the reason why his horror was such a success. His horror fiction was such a success. So that was The Shining. I enjoyed that, as I did the previous two. After The Shining, I read what is my favourite Stephen King book. That is The Stand. I think this is just spectacular. The plot is very simple. Centres around a pandemic a weaponized strain of flu that kills almost the entire population of the United States and I think the rest of the world. But this is set in the States. And then the people that, for whatever reason, are immune to this strain of influenza, they try to find each other, they try to band together, they try to form a new society. But of course there are frictions. There's some people who wish to do more harm than good. And that's about it really. And it seems like quite a bare plot for a very long book. This version is 1,400 pages long. But it is quite a bare plot, because fundamentally I felt like this, more than anything else, was a character study. This was an extended character study of multiple characters. That's where this shines. King is very good at world building. I think his plots are actually his weakest point. When you lay the plots out, they often don't seem like much, but when you read the book, they're usually very gripping, a lot of fun. I think that comes down to the way in which he builds character, which comes across so effortless, and they're so real, they're so well-rounded. And this is the perfect example of King doing that. Everyone sticks with you after reading this. You don't forget reading this book. The only other person I can think of that does that to such an exceptional degree is Charles Dickens. Again, there are some similarities there. Charles Dickens, of course, was ridiculed during his time. Ridiculed it by the critics. People loved him, but the critics, even to this day, people criticise Dickens for being frivolous and for being a bit manipulative with the reader. So he's not considered serious fiction, whatever that might mean. Same thing for Stephen King. Typically that has been the response from the critics, that it's not serious fiction. Oh yes, you might enjoy reading it, but is it serious? Well, what does that mean? It's very easy to be snobby about fiction, isn't it? Anyway, I'm going off track. This is a really great book, and what I would say is, if you only read one Stephen King novel, make it The Stand, because The Stand has everything in it that Stephen King is so good at doing. It's wonderful. So that's The Stand. And then after The Stand there's The Dead Zone, which is somewhere around here. Here we are. Dead Zone. Now this one I liked a lot less. I didn't enjoy The Dead Zone that much. It was okay. I don't regret reading it. I just found that it was a bit dull. I think particularly having just come off the back of The Stand, this to me didn't seem all that special, whereas The Stand did seem special. I am in a minority here because I do know that this was Stephen King's best-selling novel at the time, so this outsold all the other ones, so this was commercially one of his most successful novels. The story I also found a little bit convoluted, so I apologise if I don't summarise this very well, but it's based around a man called Johnny Smith, who he wakes from a coma of about 5 years, and he has some sort of brain damage, so that when he touches certain things, he experiences clairvoyance, visions. can tell the future. And then there's this serial killer in the novel, and there's this politician, and I felt like the politics, the political side of it, bog things down a bit. But there is a film adaptation of this starring Christopher Walken, which is good stuff if you like Christopher Walken, which I do, because he is unintentionally hilarious in the film adaptation of this. He's very, very Christopher Walken. Very erratic, very strange delivery of his lines. His hair is vertical practically in it. He's incredibly intense, very, very funny. Again, not intentionally, he's trying to play it straight, but in this instance I preferred the film to the book. It's sacrilegious, I know, but there you have it. So that's The Dead Zone. Then, after The Dead Zone, came Firestarter, and this was good. My only complaint about Firestarter, and I don't think this really holds up, but I'm going to say it anyway, my only slight complaint was I felt like it was ever so slightly derivative of Carrie, just because in the Firestarter you have this young girl called Charlie McGee, and she has these pyrotechnic abilities that she can summon with her mind, set things on fire. And I found that I was thinking back to Carrie a lot when I was reading this. But really, when I think about that, I'm not sure that argument's particularly strong because, well, what am I suggesting? That Stephen King can't have a female child protagonist ever again because it's going to be derivative of Carrie? I don't think so. So I think this is more of a subjective disappointment than an objective one. Not that the book in its entirety was a disappointment. It was, again, another fun read. Probably one I would have really enjoyed when I was younger as well, I think. So that was Firestarter. Then, after Firestarter, I read Kyojo, which is one of his more famous ones. Kyojo, quite a simple plot, actually quite short for King. I think this is the shortest book here. It is about a rabid dog, a Saint Bernard. And Stephen King claims that the novel was actually partly inspired by a mechanic he saw in the 70s who also had a big, scary Saint Bernard. This is really good. The ending is absolutely horrific. Not quite what I was expecting. That warmth that I was talking about earlier, that sort of is missing the ending here. But it's a good read. By the way, I didn't mention, I'm only reading the novels by King that are novels and not series or a collection of short stories. So that's why you don't see the Dark Tower series on here. I'm considering that as a separate timeline almost. And that is also why I don't have any of the Richard Bachman novels here. Stephen King in the late 70s and early 80s wrote as if he didn't have enough to do with all the other novels he was writing. He was writing under a pseudonym, and that pseudonym was Richard Bachman, and he wrote a number of stories. And I'm also considering that a separate timeline, so I'm just doing chronological Stephen King independent novels are part of a series, and that aren't part of his alter ego. So that's why if you know him very well, which I don't at all, I'm not a Stephen King expert, but long stretch. If you know him well and you're seeing me go through this chronologically, you might think this isn't chronological at all because I'm missing out a whole load of other books. I know that I'm missing them out. It's intentional. I've set some weird ground rules for myself. And then once I finish doing all of the standalone Stephen King novels, I will then go back and read the series as a complete set, because that's the other thing, of course. The Gunslinger series, the Dark Tower series, they were released sporadically. I would rather read them in one long chunk, so that's another, perhaps slightly more logical reason why I wouldn't include them in this. Right, that was a long explanation. I hope that's not too tedious. So, Kyojo. And then, following Kyojo was a weird one, actually. This was, after Kyojo came Christine. This one, I don't know how memorable this one is to other people, but this has stuck with me because it's such a strange premise. It tells the story of a car, a 1958 Plymouth Fury, to be exact, that is apparently possessed by malevolent forces, which is just really out there, really strange. And one sort of thinks, how on earth can that be stretched? How can a premise like that be stretched out over 800 pages? But he does it very well, and it's really rather good. And there's also a good film adaptation of this, because the film, it might be made for TV, I'm not sure, but it's very old and very ropey and really good stuff. Good fun to watch because of how clunky it is. Unlike this novel, which is not clunky, but is a good read. And you'll zip through this despite its length. It's a quick read as well. And you should read it just because the premise is so crazy, right? And then there was Pet Sematary, I think, came after that. Was it Pet Sematary? I definitely have read Pet Sematary. I think that's what came next. And that was recently made into a film with the great John Lithgow, another fantastic actor I always enjoy seeing. And then after, I don't have that there, so I don't have that here, so I can't talk about that so much, but I'm sure most of you know about Pet Sematary, just like most of you know. Next one, It. And this one I haven't started yet, so this is next on my list. And I'm looking forward to reading this because I know, bizarrely, I think I know nothing about it. And I think that's bizarre because I think quite a lot of people know at least the premise to it. I do not. It's just completely passed me by. I think when I was younger, well, I'm too young to have seen the first film. So that I never saw because it was, I either wasn't born or it was R-rated and I was like 5 or something. And the new ones I avoided intentionally because I had already decided I was going to do this chronological thing at some point and I didn't want to spoil the book for myself. So this is next. And once I've read this, I will happily do a review on this channel should this be of interest to anyone. And there you go, that's my very, very, very quick, brief rundown of some of Stephen King, chronological rundown of some of Stephen King's early books. And I hope you found that relaxing, and I hope I've inspired you to go out there and read some Stephen King. As I say, I'm no expert on him, and he's not even my favourite author. I just think he's I think he's good fun, so often his books are really easy to read, but they offer a lot at the same time. And yeah, these are all great so far, and I'm looking forward to the rest.